Hey everybody, welcome back to The History Freak, and today we're going to be talking about Henry VIII's fourth wife, Anne of Cleves. But before we start, if you're enjoying these videos, and we hope you are, we would love it if you would take the time to like and subscribe. Also, feel free to put your comments and questions down below. But please remember to be kind and respect everybody else's opinions. Anne was born in 1515 in Dusseldorf. She was brought up strictly, but not well educated. She didn't speak English, which is not unreasonable for a woman not from England, but it certainly wouldn't help her situation when she later became queen. Her father was John, Duke of Cleves, Cleves being a former state of Germany. His son and Anne's brother, William, became the Duke after the death of John in 1539. And William would have been highly involved in the negotiations for Anne's marriage to Henry. One of the earliest things known about Anne is that at the age of 11 she was betrothed to Francis, Duke of Lorraine. However, this betrothal didn't last long. It was sometime around 1539 when negotiations with Cleves and England started for a possible marriage. Alliance with Protestant Germany was attractive to Henry and his Chancellor Thomas Cromwell, who championed the match, because they were worried about being isolated in Europe against Catholic Spain and France. Fun fact, although Anne's family were mostly Protestant, her mother was actually a Catholic, and her mother had most influence on her growing up. Therefore, it's quite possible that Anne herself had Catholic beliefs. Looks were clearly very important to Henry. He was determined to have a wife that was attractive to him. This doesn't seem unreasonable, but with only portraits to judge on, it made it hard to arrange. He considered many European princesses. However, Henry's actions in murdering one of his wives, not surprisingly, meant many women weren't really keen on taking the role of his next wife. Once Cleves was in the mix for Henry's next queen, he had the artist Holbein travel to Cleves to paint a portrait of Anne, as well as her sister Amelia. It was a case of which portrait Henry liked most. He gave instructions to the artist not to flatter in his work. In the portrait, Anne looks neither beautiful nor ugly, but something about the picture clearly took Henry's fancy. Arrangements were made, and Anne left Cleves for a new home in England. She would never return or see her family again. The first meeting was a complete disaster. Henry, always the showman, loved to dress up and pretend to be some handsome stranger, and the court would play along because he was the king, and everything about court life was about being in his favour. But Anne knew nothing about any of this. So when at Rochester they first met, Anne is unaware that the man who enters the room is Henry in disguise. And then when he kissed her and offered her a token as if from the king, she reacted with shock, embarrassment, and possible disgust. So awkward was this moment that after a brief acknowledgement, she basically ignored him. Henry was used to everyone playing along. He was angry and embarrassed. He returned shortly after in royal dress as himself. Anne would have realised what happened and was likely mortified. It was a terrible start, and her lack of English would have made it hard to smooth over this awkward situation. Was it because of this terrible start to the relationship, or was it because how Anne looked? We can't be sure, but what we are sure of, Henry did not like Anne. He was furious. He felt he had been tricked into agreeing the match in the first place. He took out his anger on Cromwell. But it seemed he didn't hold Holbein responsible, due to the fact that the artist remained in his pay for a long time after all this happened. So was Anne as bad as Henry said? Reports about her was that she was not unattractive, and certainly not as bad as Henry thought. Beauty is of course in the eye of the beholder, and others actually described her very positively, as being fair and lovely, although older and solemn. But regardless to anyone else's opinion, the only opinion that mattered was Henry's. and Anne was not to his taste. On top of that, she was not well educated, like some of Henry's previous wives, and she was unable to speak English well. Everything about her made Henry more angry. It was a doomed match. Thomas Cromwell had strongly made a case for the match, as he wanted to ensure England had a strong alliance against Spain and France in case they teamed up and attacked England. Cromwell was not born high, but he was highly educated and rose to power working for former Chancellor Cardinal Wolsey. Henry's reaction was a disaster for Cromwell. He must have been under horrendous pressure, as Henry told him find a way for him not to marry Anne. But the political effects of that and breaking the alliance were too dangerous for England. Therefore, Henry married Anne on the 6th of January 1540. Anne was 24, Henry was 48. Henry wanted Anne gone and told his lawyers to find a way to have the marriage annulled. He claimed the marriage was never consummated and therefore not valid. Anne seems to have been a bit confused and unaware of the danger of the situation. She said to one of her ladies that the only contact they seemed to have was a kiss goodnight. Was Anne incredibly naive? Even by the standard of the times, she must have had some awareness of how a marriage worked and how to get pregnant. Or had her strict upbringing left her totally unprepared, with no one ever educating her properly? Whatever the truth, by not having consummated the marriage, Anne's position was very dangerous. Henry was determined to get out of the marriage. Ultimately, the lack of consummation, as well as Anne's prior betrothal to the Duke of Lorraine, were the reasons used to end the marriage. When Anne was told the situation, she didn't fight it, and on the 24th of June, Anne was told to leave the court. For such willing surrender, Henry rewarded Anne with money and properties, and she would be known moving forward as the king's sister. This was actually quite a good result, as she was able to live as a wealthy private woman. She even managed to form somewhat of a friendship with Henry, and she would visit court from time to time and be shown great respect by him. Cromwell did not fare so well. His part in the arrangement of the marriage would cost him his life. Anne seems to have had a generally good relationship with Henry's children, as she continued to be mentioned in court records after Henry's death. She eventually died during Mary's reign, possibly of cancer, and she was the last of Henry's wives to die. So was Anne a victim or a winner of this crazy situation? Well, she was probably a bit of both. It must have been humiliating and lonely for her, but she came out quite well and still alive, unlike some of Henry's other queens. I can't help but feel some sympathy for her, and admire the way she made the best out of a tough situation. I also think she had a very lucky escape. But what are your thoughts about Anne? What kind of wife and queen would she have made had Henry liked her enough to keep her around? Do you think she was treated well or badly? And what do you think about how Anne handled the situation? Should she have got tough with Henry, or did she play it right? Comment down below your thoughts, and remember, once again, please like and subscribe this video if you enjoyed it. And join us again on our next video when we're going to be talking about Henry's fifth wife, Catherine Howard.